But there was this special operator that Rick had come up with named Master Sergeant David
Jeff.
Cannon. Jeff, why do I keep saying Rick? Jeff, I'm sorry.
Rick's a great guy. He's very handsome. So I
I
can
know.
see why you would think that not as handsome as me, but I can see why you think
I'm
that.
gonna cut that out. That's getting cut out. Um,
No, that needs to be the intro.
we're just gonna. I don't know. I guess I don't know. Rick always feels like bad if he's not here because he doesn't get to be part of the conversation. So we're making him part of the conversation.
Truck troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest.
Recording in progress. Well, hey, welcome to the show. Today you have the
A very
joy of
special episode.
very special episode of just me and Jeff. And we, unfortunately, Rick is in crap, which national park now? I'm forgetting. Not Yellowstone.
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone, yeah. So folks might not know that Rick also does wildlife photography and is incredibly accomplished at his wildlife photography. So he, having moved to Wyoming now, he just spends a whole lot of time in national parks, especially when the weather is like, below zero. But he posts a lot of that stuff on his Facebook, and I think he probably puts it on Twitter/X as well, or Instagram. But it's all a cool thing to check out if you didn't know about it. And then Josh wasn't able to be here either because he cares about his family, which is a good thing. So today you get me and Jeff, and we're talking about, if you may have heard mention in the last episode of me losing my contract with Athon, which is always scary to me, but no, we are working on a new collaboration, which
Technically,
is,
you don't have a contract with Athon yet.
well, I have a previous contract with Athon, so they technically have like first right of refusal on other things past that. Um, this is just a thing to, I guess, reinforce that other contract. But that's a cool thing about Athon books is that they really support writers. So it's
They are
been,
incredibly flexible and
yes,
it's really nice.
yeah. So we're working on a series within the Grimm's War universe, and one of the things, I think Jeff has talked a lot about putting so much research into the naval aspect of it. And I think you did a lot of interviews with a Coast Guard friend as well, right? For background.
Yeah, I have a friend, Jennifer Collins. She was actually my best friend's younger sister growing up. She was my best friend growing up, his younger sister. There we go. And we've always had a connection. And she joined the Coast Guard and ended up having a much more exciting military life than I ever did joining the Army. And she recently just retired from boat duty. She's now a naval admiral's aide or something like that in on the East Coast. But yeah, I talked to her a bunch about getting the feel right. She actually worked in the galley a lot, so she's kind of the basis for Josh Mendez. I interviewed a lot of retired World War II naval guys, specifically destroyer guys. I read a bunch of essays written by guys who served on Fletchers, which is the main destroyer for World War II that the US used, so I could get the feeling right. And if you think that there's a theme of World War II, you'd be correct, because while I could do a lot of modern day Navy stuff and like get the feel of modern day Navy right, there's a the World War II Navy was much more of a boat oriented Navy, whereas the modern Navy is really more of an aircraft and submarine oriented Navy. There are no aircraft carriers in space, and so yeah, that's why I went that route, because I wanted that feeling that even if you serve today, it would be universal. And I ended up meeting with a friend in Las Vegas a couple years ago who served on destroyers in the South China Sea for 3 years. And he said, reading the books, he was like, I know you didn't serve on destroyers. I know you weren't even in the Navy, but damned if I could tell, you know. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. So you did your homework. Um, and we were talking about different things. Like I think Jeff has always it's oh, sorry, my phone is ringing.
How dare you?
I know. Um, I'll
Better
just
put
cut
mine
that
on
out.
do
I- the last one I went more loose because every time I get ready to like cut something, somebody would say something funny. So I just left a lot of it in. Um, but anyway, so we talked about, okay, what would it look like, because that was such a naval focus, what would it look like if there was something that was more focused on the Army? And in the world of Grimm, like there isn't a lot of Army presence. And one of the jokes, which I actually even, spoiler alert, there's going to be a series here. Um, One of the quotes that I start the first book with, from Gunny Jenkins is like, why does the Army even exist? Like we have the Marines, who even needs the Army? Um, and that, of course, got my, as a former enlisted soldier and Army officer, that got my blood boiling just a little bit, because the purpose of the Army is to seize and hold terrain. Um, but we've seen a lot of differences in the Army across the last, even 30 years. And so I don't know, we start talking about different ways we could get the Army into this story, especially because the Army was basically not necessarily a peacetime, but after the Great War with the Caliphate, like there wasn't a lot of need for an army. So, as we've talked about it, we imagined kind of this, drawdown, like the sort of thing that happened between World War I and World War II, where you had a lot of units that were on paper, you had a lot of people that got pushed out to reserves, and then when the time comes that we need an army to occupy a planet, which is Medial, the planet that was liberated by the Interceptor. All of a sudden we need an army, and this is kind of part of that build up to what folks are seeing as a coming war with another war with the Caliphate.
Technically, it wasn't liberated by the
I'm
Interceptor.
sorry. Well, yeah,
Spoiler alert: in
liberated,
Book 3, the Interceptor raided
raided. I should
Medial.
have said raided.
If you haven't read Book 3 by now, I don't know what to tell you, but you should. It's my favorite one that I wrote. Of all the books, it was my favorite one to write. Um, Strangely enough, it's my least favorite. It's not like it's a big difference, but it's got 4.6 stars on Amazon, and all the other books have 4.7. So
Hmm.
clearly, it's the reader's least favorite. But it was my favorite to write. And um, bear in mind that, like you said, there's like a big drawdown. The Army's job is to seize and hold territory. But when you're talking about territory being planets and not like islands or continents or whatever, there's no real need to have a huge standing army if you're not at war. And so what happened in the Grimm's War universe, and I did a lot of research on this and gave it a lot of thought, because I didn't want to just, because I was Army, I didn't want to just like, well, the Army sucks, Marines, hoorah,
Mhm.
I love all the branches, even the Air Force. And what I didn't want was to have them just be there for no reason whatsoever. So what I ended up having doing is the Army is in charge of all the forts and the prisons, military prisons. And that's it. There's no infantry, there's no, at least at the beginning of the book series, there isn't any of that. There is special forces though, because that would be a way more efficient use of military, personnel to have special forces who are ground based than, like, say, Marine Raiders or MARSOC in space, because Marines in the Grimswar universe are primarily used as shipboard infantry. So, they do the security for the ships. If the ships are on foreign planets, they perform security at the landing bases. And it just so happened in book 5, when the Enterprise and Admiral Webster's task force seized Medial and ended up destroying a bunch of the Caliphate fleet, the Marines of those battleships, those two battle groups, are the ones who took the planet. But there's only about 4,000 of them taking a planet of like 500,000 people. And obviously 4,000 people aren't going to hold an entire planet. Now, bear in mind, if you had read the books, you'd know that most of the population in Medial is centered around one city, and then spread out, around that area. And it's not exactly a great planet. People don't want to live there. It was only populated because it was sort of like a no-go zone for the Caliphate, where pirates could come and sell their slaves, and the Caliphate could be like, oh, hey, well, we don't technically own this planet. So we're not technically involved in the intergalactic slave trade. Look at us. We're peaceful. And um, boy, I've written a lot of this stuff. And so you have that sort of situation where all of a sudden the Alliance is looking at the galactic map, and the Caliphate has over 100 planets. The Alliance has 24 or 25, I forget exactly. They're gonna need an army to hold ground, and so they start ramping up, the Army really quick to relieve the Marines, so the Marines can get back aboard ship and go on to be the conquering force, basically. So it's like the Marines are the forlorn hope, which is an old term. It means the first through the wall. And the Army is going to come up and secure the bases behind them and secure the space lanes and or secure the planets and orbit of the planets, stuff like that. So yeah, I could go on, but maybe I shouldn't.
Well, that's what well, and that's so one of the things we wanted to talk about was how the sort of relationship and the back and forth works when you're working on a project like this. And my experience comes from I've written 12 novels at this point in the AN14 universe with MD Cooper, and kind of did a little bit of a similar thing where Aeon 14 covers thousands of years, but there was a period between like the year 3000 and the year 4000 at the very beginning of the series that there nothing had been come up with yet. There were broad strokes like this. And then our friend Lisa Richmond actually wrote a whole other two other series that were like kind of at that very endpoint between like I think it was I don't know 3800 and 4000. But looking when you look at a series as a whole, like it's got to be something you love, you find interesting. Like there's a lot of hooks in there, and hooks might not be something that you think about as a reader, but when I'm reading as a writer, I'm always looking for places where, oh, hey, that's something that could be expanded, or that's interesting to me, or that character is interesting. And Jeff has raised his hand.
Well, I didn't know how if that would work. We talked about doing that last week. I didn't want to
Yeah.
interrupt you. I just want to point out L.L. Richmond on Amazon.
LL Richmond. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Fantastic writer. And I
Yes.
also wanted to say that M.D. Cooper's Out System is one of my favorite science fiction novels of all time. It's not military sci-fi. I don't know if she would agree with that, but it's not. Um, there are military aspects to it. There are military people in
Right.
it. It's not mil sci-fi. It is great science fiction, though. And I highly recommend Out System to anybody who enjoys really good science fiction. I didn't really care for the follow-on novels. Sorry.
No, they're
Sorry,
very
Mel. I didn't.
they can be different.
But the
My
first one, well, so good.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, my piece of it, like, it's pretty much within that same thing because, Outsystem is pretty solidly space opera. My main character was a pilot who'd gotten out of the Air Force, and it's kind of about him trying to, like, living as a veteran with a family. So it sort of becomes a little bit of like Swiss Family Robinson, with like the family against um, just everything, all the bad things that are going on in Saul. But when you're looking at those places where you could do something interesting, but within the confines of what the other writer has already come up with. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. Like you come up with broad strokes, and it actually gets harder the more detailed things become. So you have to find a place where you can, like, hey, something was thrown out there, like this system existed or this planet existed, like Medial did. And Medial is really interesting because there's like I think it's setting up the way Jeff did, where hey, this is a place where a lot of black market and gray market stuff happens. It's a place where the caliphate kind of lets things happen that are outside their normal operation. If we look at like analogs, because the other thing I do with something like this, like I wanted this to be based a lot more kind of just like I'm sorry, Jeff has been looking at history. What are some analogs in our own world that are similar to this? Like, just looking at even Afghanistan and like the Karangal Valley and how elements of the Karangal really overflowed into Pakistan, and that's one of the reasons that that area was really valuable to the Taliban was that they could move. There's a whole lot of gray market and black market movement back and forth between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so there's a whole lot of really cool analogs to look at that we put it on a planetary scale. Then we add in stuff that I just kind of already knew from I mean, just in my career in the Army, when I first came in, they were coming out of the drawdown. Or actually, I take that back because one of my very first drills in the reserve that I went to, I was like, I think I might have even been 17. I go to this meeting where it's a bunch of like E7s who are all Vietnam vets talking about how to get out because the Army's doing a drawdown. And how do I fill out my paperwork? Can I take early retirement? Like, should I do it? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, whatever. But
I had that same experience when I joined in
yeah.
'92. Um, all my sergeants were Vietnam vets for the most part.
Mhm.
And they were all trying to get out because of what was going on in the Army at the time.
Yeah.
because a lot of them were being kicked out, and they wanted to get out before they got kicked out.
Yeah. And I mean, that's nothing new if you've been in the army. And then I felt like I was lucky to get out of the army in '05 because I really expected to get stop lost when I hit the end of my commitment. Um,
I don't know if I've ever told this story, but my inactive ready reserve ended 2 months before 9/11.
mm,
9/11 was the year I met Rebecca. And so I was desperate in love with her and I wanted to marry her. And 9/11 happened and I'm looking at my paperwork. I dug my paperwork out when I got back home because I was in Alaska at the time working
mm,
a tourist job. And I got back home and I dug out my paperwork and I'm like, August, no, July of '01 was the end of my inactive ready reserve. And so I was waiting for a letter from the Army showing to show up at any time now and be like, hey, guess what? We need commo people. You're going back in. And I would have gladly served my country again if they called. I just didn't want to because I wanted to get married. And she
you're,
didn't, she made it clear that she did not date a soldier.
yeah,
And you know, having that experience of marrying her and living with her for 23 years, I can tell you that there are people who are um, there are women who are perfectly okay being alone, uh, you know, marrying a soldier and being alone for years at a time and doing everything on their own, and then seeing their husband for 8 months and then not seeing him again for 18 months. I don't think Rebecca would have been one of them. And we've talked about this before. This is no big surprise. I turned down a job, or I applied for a job in Antarctica because it would have been eight months of being in Antarctica, and it would have been just 3 years worth of salary at my current rate back in '04. But I ended up saying no because you know, we talked about it and prayed about it, and she just didn't think she could do it being alone for a year with a new baby and no husband. So it's like she's like, that's not
it's,
why I got married.
I, I left a marriage in the army and I would, if anybody, you gotta choose where your priority's at. And that's the problem with being in the military is it's always hard to make your priority actually your family. And I would tell anybody like the time that I missed with my kids and with my wife at the time, it worked out for the best, I guess. But that a lot of that was because I was gone. The last the last 3 years I was pretty much gone a year and a half by the time everything was added up. And it, I wouldn't recommend that to anybody.
And
So
believe it or not, this actually comes up in Grimm's War. That's
yeah.
kind of why
Yeah,
I
with
brought it up
Nadia and
is,
Jacob, yeah.
yeah, you know, she gets out of the Navy and, you know, they have a relationship. There's other people in the books that have a relationship. Um, you Cook First Class Josh Mendez has a relationship that he's not quite technically supposed to have. Um, and I'm trying to figure out how to work that one out.
Make him an officer.
So
Send him to OCS.
no, I love officers. Don't get me wrong, James. And you were a great officer. I'm sure you were a great officer. I would love to have served under you. Um, you know, there are officers like I had this girl who was I say girl because now I'm 51 and she was like when I was 18 or 19 when I joined, she was probably 21, you know.
Yeah.
I would never have called her a girl at the time, but she was a West Pointer. She was the only West
Mhm.
Pointer I ever met that I respected. I would have gone to hell and back for her. She was great. And the other three lieutenants I served with, I would have sent them to hell, you know, given the opportunity. We had plans, you know, damnedest thing I ever saw, Sarge. That grenade just went right into his tent.
Oh, I had a
But
peer whose first sergeant joked about offering her if we went down range, he was going to offer. Like we were getting ready to go. We're in Turkey, and he's like, "Time for a change of command." Like you need to shut up, Tom. You don't talk like
yeah,
that.
there are people you were happy to serve with, and then there are people who are just gonna have to have accidents because they're gonna get you killed. It doesn't happen often though, I don't think. Um, there's very few and far between. There are two people I ever served with, I think would have met accidents had we gone downrange when I was in. Or at least downrange the way you guys did. I was in the 90s, so there were some other places we went that weren't quite as chaotic and widespread as, say, you Afghanistan or Iraq in the aughts. But so there's a lot of like a lot of stuff to navigate here is what we're getting at. There's a lot of regulations and rules, and yeah, it's a fictional military, but it's based on our military in the U.S. It's based on all of our experiences and stuff that I can read. I read a lot of books, so not just fictional books. I read a lot of nonfiction military books. I draw from a lot of historical precedents and stuff like that, and so does James. And what he's doing with Medial and the Army is pretty cool. So go on, James.
No, so based on what Jeff had started with, like I found Medial to be just a really cool hook. Like there's a lot of stuff there when you think about it. Like just being under the caliphate, being under, if we use like Iran maybe as a sort of I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're going for, but that's kind of I've been thinking about a lot about the way Iran is actually organized as a country, and the way their population is controlled and the multiple layers of police they have. Like those people are just unfortunately under like secret police, religious police,
Oh yeah,
and
no,
trying to
it's
make a
exactly
living.
like that.
Yeah, yeah.
The Caliphate has something called the ISB, the Internal
Hmm.
Security Bureau.
Yep.
They have their secret police. They have their religious police. Nadia runs into them in book 5, Know Thy Enemy.
Yep.
She's disguised as an old woman moving through Caliphate space, trying to get to the secret intelligence base to infiltrate it. And the reason she's disguised as an old woman is because she'd be left alone. I don't want to get into the gruesome details of Islamic culture, but young, pretty women in Islamic culture don't stand much of a chance if they're by themselves. And so she was disguised as an older woman and married to like a science bureau, minister of science guy.
Right.
And at one point, she runs into the religious police, and one of them is like, "Hey, man, just leave her alone. She's an old woman. Respect your elders," kind of thing. And the other guy wants to rough her up because she's by herself. And so, you have there's this guy I follow on YouTube, your boy Zach. He does comic reviews, but he was an Army engineer, lieutenant. I believe he's in the Army. Might have been the Marines, but he was an engineer, and he like built schools and dug wells and stuff like that. And he talks a lot about night letters and how that affected the people in Afghanistan. They'd wake up, and if they were collaborating with the U.S., they'd have a letter on their door basically condemning them to death. And so there's a lot of that. Yeah. So it's a lot like that. The
Yeah.
basis of the caliphate is from the 8th century, but, obviously there's a lot of modern day stuff in there too.
And so that just made me a really interesting place to think about. And then so I wanted to do like when we thought about okay, what kind of characters? Like we were talking about different like how can we make something that's interesting? I mean, Jacob is a pretty unique character even within the Navy. But there was this special operator that Rick had come up with named Master Sergeant Danny
Jeff.
Cannon. Jeff, why do I keep saying Rick? Jeff, I'm sorry.
Rick's a great guy. He's very handsome. So
I
I can
know.
see why you would think that not as handsome as me, but I can see why you think that.
I'm gonna cut that out. That's getting cut out.
No, that needs to be the intro.
We're just gonna. I don't know. I guess I don't. Rick always feels like bad if he's not here because he doesn't get to be part of the conversation. So we're making him part of the conversation. No, Jeff had come up with this awesome character, Master Sergeant Danny Cannon, who also
He's really cool. Yeah,
he is cool. He is approved, one of the few people approved by Gunny Jenkins. So that's an
Jennings.
upside. Jennings. We got to talk about like Google.
He's read the
Notebook, too.
books. I swear.
Well, I
He has
have
read the books.
and this is something. Note taking is actually a thing that I spend a lot of time on. This
I
point
keep
in my
telling you,
life,
James, you've got ADHD. You need
well,
medicine.
this point in my life, it's really difficult sometimes to hang on to details like that. So I actually have made a list of like all the characters so I can go back and I'm constantly fixing spelling errors where I fix names that I haven't quite cemented them in my mind. So anyway,
I'm
Gunny
going to give you
Jennings,
guys. Sorry, I'm going to give you a
go
pro
ahead.
tip, a free pro tip to all the writers listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
Don't spell names different than they are, generally speaking, and don't go so crazy with names that you can't remember how you spelled it, because you will spell it differently at one point and you will not notice, and you'll have a whole book where Allison is spelled with 2 L's instead of 1 L like it was the other books. Bear that in mind.
This is true.
Do that.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't even got into like all the why it's difficult for me to write right now, but anyway, so wanted to come up with a story about kind of similar to Jake because one of the things you talk about is write something that's similar but different, right? And so we wanted to do like it's pretty hard to replicate Jacob, but the character that we've developed is named Charlie Cannon, and he is Danny Cannon's nephew, and he basically chooses to go into the military, kind of following his uncle's footsteps. Although his dad is a great character too, and he grew up on a wildlife preserve. His dad runs basically kind of specialty tours and hunting expeditions, and so Charlie has a really strong background in kind of fieldcraft and things of that nature. Although that's not going to help him a huge amount on medial, but it does help a lot with just his kind of general competency. And it's kind of funny. I was going to say, Jeff, when you were talking about like being an officer, like I would say that being a Boy Scout was like 80% of what made me a good officer. Um, and there were times like, it's pouring rain. We're just out there trying to set up a GP medium and nobody knows how to like tie knots. And I'm just like running around tying sheepshanks on, to get the tent up. And they just looked at me like I was working magic, and like, LT, what are you doing? Um, and then
The next day, did you give them a book on tying knots and get them all to start tying knots?
Yeah, yeah. No, we didn't have time, but it's that kind of thing that I wanted Charlie to be that kind of character,
I
but
love it.
but he also runs into, and this is something that like basically every kind of like our time, it's so their battalion is Mudcats, but the equivalent there is kind of like a striker brigade, in the way it's mechanized infantry with dismounts. And if you imagine that in, unfortunately, like Afghanistan, they're operating at a very high altitude already, and then you've just got like you've had your river valley and just almost straight up and down, mountains you need to operate in with ridges looking down on pretty much every approach that you might want to take to get to somebody's location, with like goat paths basically going between them. So they'll go into their locations with mudcats, but then a lot of the combat is going to take place basically like small squad actions along these, in these hills. And but one of the things I wanted to show too is that there's a progression, and they're going to go. The Marines have been on medial. Everything is pretty much okay, but the Caliphate is also, by the Marines being there and the task force pulling out, that has given the Caliphate time to kind of rebuild some of their capability on the world. And so things seem great for the Marines, but then when the Army gets in there, it starts to turn bad. And a few of the things that happen, I'm going to throw in a few dumb Armyisms. I'm getting ready to write a scene that's like from the as things start going downhill in the village, they're going to go on a run in the village because the company commander and the brigade commander tell them to. Which
Show the flag.
Oh yeah. And if you were in the army, that's just like, why are we doing this dumb? Why would we do this? But
If
that's
it
gonna
wasn't too on the nose, I'd tell you to have them wear safety belts, but it's
right.
too on the nose.
But it's gonna be the kind of thing where you see a lieutenant trying to do the right thing. This is gonna come on the heels of actually something really bad that turns the town against them. And then it'll kind of show that really quickly moving downhill to the way, not exactly like things happen in Afghanistan, but kind of similar. But it's no fun to, I mean, one of the things I've kind of run into is it's not a lot of fun to write about the way things happened in Afghanistan. And one of the big differences here is that it's not like the Taliban. Like there actually is I mean, the Taliban was obviously an adversary, but there's going to be a much more concrete adversary that they'll eventually come into contact with.
There were no Afghani regulars.
Right.
The Islamic forces do not like to wear uniforms and stand up in positions and fight you symmetrically. Part of it is because they're, I mean, I don't mean this in the derogatory way. I mean this in the historical way. They're barbarian culture. They're about raiding. They're tribal. They're about, like, let me show you my force. Which is why it's really interesting if you look at like the history of that area, not just modern history, but like going all the way back, as far as there's a written record, which is a long ways. You have a culture that is like, I want something you have. I'm going to come over and hit you as hard as I can, so you know exactly how hard I can hit. And then the U.S. goes in there and doesn't hit really very hard, and so the poor, Afghanis who are fighting us are like, oh, that's as hard as they can hit, you know, and it really is. It's really interesting cultural clash on how you fight a war. And it was not a war. I don't want to get into politics of it. It was just not a war we were prepared to fight the way we fought it.
Right.
And that's leadership. That's all 100% political leadership. If you ever don't like the way things happen in the military, in a war or an action, it is not the soldiers on the ground. It is not the officers leading the men. It is not even the colonels. It is 100% generals and above. And not even always the generals. Like there's that movie with Brad Pitt about the Afghani, the general came in during the what they call it when George Bush was leaving the surge.
Oh, the surge.
Um, you know, a lot of times they're just doing what some Tommy Rumsfeld, who you cannot hate enough, is just telling them what to do, you know, and they don't have a choice. So
Yeah. I mean, Afghanistan,
it's all interesting.
and that's the first book at least is not going to get hugely into politics. It's really just trying to set the stage for what's going to happen overall. But that absolutely is one of the things, those rules of engagement, like trying to go into a place without hitting first, to a people that don't respect that necessarily, or just even have been used to a different way of life. And so they just don't even know how to relate to you because you don't operate the way that, the previous government did. And so showing that is one of the things that's interesting about this and going to be, is fun. So trying to do it in a way that just is not, I don't know, droning on about it. I don't know. Trying to show through action is the thing that I'm really working on now. Like I've had a lot of fun because one of the things I wanted to do as well, I think, in Grimm's War, Nadia is an awesome character, but also serves the purpose of giving you that kind of outside, 1,000-foot view where she can go interact with naval intelligence and she can go to other parts of the galaxy while Jacob is clearly in the fight, on the solar system level and the ship level. And so wanting to create some things like that aren't just a complete analog. I've got so I had to have Charlie go through the academy. I felt bad about that, but in this world, there's only an academy. There's no ROTC. But he's got a buddy that graduates.
Well, wait a second. No,
I guess we haven't talked about ROTC. I feel like there has to be an academy. Otherwise,
there are colleges. There is.
Okay.
There's the officers.
Uh-huh.
There's an officer university, like West Point on Black Rock.
Right.
But there are colleges and universities throughout the entire Alliance space.
But do they have ROTC?
Of course they would.
Just going to do that. I'll finish the book and he'll be like, oh, but there was this.
Of course there's ROTC. Why would there be? I actually think I mentioned it at some point.
Do you?
Now,
okay,
Jacob,
search for
Jacob went to the Systems Alliance version of Annapolis on Black Rock.
Right
out of high school. His mom, spoiler alert, you find this out in the first book. His mom paid for it with her life. She died heroically in duty in the Great War, and so that earned his place out of high school to go into the Black Rock Naval Academy. But there are officers who were joined after you. Like there's an engineer in book 2. He's the ship's engineer. I forget his name. He doesn't like Jacob, but he's a great engineer. But him and Jacob don't get along, and he has to come around to Jacob's because when you don't get along with the captain doesn't change, you change. And he had 2 degrees he gotten from university, and then he joined the Navy and was really upset that he was stationed on a destroyer because he was promised he'd be doing R&D. Note to anybody joining the military, promises are worth only the paper they're printed on.
So this was Lieutenant Gonzalez?
Yeah, Gonzalez, yeah.
So for what I'm doing off screen here is we've been like the only like super useful AI thing I've come across recently.
Gosh, and we've looked, buddies.
Yeah.
We've looked, people. We have looked.
Is Google's new Notebook LLM, and it's basically like it's notebooklm.google.com, and you can feed it sources and then ask questions just against those sources. So we've got a notebook set up,
and it's about what 80-90% accurate.
Yeah,
I think.
So I just searched for ROTC though. Do you want to hear the results?
No results.
Well, so it says there's the Naval Academy, there's Officer Candidate School, training on ships, Fleet Command School, and training as a duty. While the term ROTC isn't used, the sources do present a system of officer training that includes academies, on-the-job experiences, and OCS. So we'll have to go look because I asked it then to tell me about Gonzalez, and Gonzalez is the main engineer on the Interceptor and with Grimm Resolve. He's described as young and inexperienced with shipboard life. He has 2 degrees, one of which is from the University of Alexandria's physics department. And let's see, it doesn't mention ROTC. So we got to go back and retcon that.
Well, I mean, I could, or you could just make up an ROTC system.
I could. Okay, I'll add
I'm more
a.
than happy. If you want him to be ROTC, I'm
Well,
more than happy to let him be ROTC.
I want him to be from the academy, but ROTC does make sense because I do describe some other officers that have been like pulled back to duty. I mean, the thing I was thinking about with ROTC is just the amount of time it takes to get that all set up. So if we're
Do they call it the academy in the Army?
no
It's,
ROTC, well, West Point, yeah, it's pretty much just called West Point, I guess is what.
yeah.
Yeah, because Naval Academy is always Naval
And
Academy, Air Force Academy.
there's the Citadel. I don't know if that still exists.
That's a private
But
school.
yeah, but it's one that leads into military service.
Yeah.
I think anyways, I could be wrong.
Well,
I didn't go to any of these schools.
If I'm thinking right, so I went through ROTC Advanced Camp, which is like basic training for cadets, and we had people from the Citadel who still had to go through Advanced Camp, if I'm remembering correctly. Like there was this whole sort of other set of feeder schools that were military colleges that still had to like meet the requirements of ROTC. So
Dude, I'm telling you, my high school guidance counselors just did me dirty.
oh yeah, mine didn't.
So bad.
The whole reason I enlisted before I even found out about ROTC was because my guidance counselor never told me about it. And then I get to my reserve unit, and this guy's asking me, like, well, what'd you join? I want to go to college. Oh, did you hear about ROTC? No. What's that? That's how I learned.
Yeah. None of my guidance counselors liked the military, and so they didn't care enough about me to want to guide me correctly. And so I just took the ASVAB and took the very first job I could get in the military, which is always a mistake. And it was funny is because when I joined, it was right after Desert Storm, and they didn't want infantry, and I wanted to be infantry, and they didn't want infantry. And so yeah, so I didn't get infantry. Spoiler alert.
See, my
Sorry,
cousin.
go on.
No, my cousin was infantry, and so he kind of turned me off from it. But I went in as a psychiatric specialist, which was basically an
Which is so cool.
orderly on a psych ward. Well, I kind of wish I'd done the job. Like, there's a whole alternate timeline where I kind of wish I'd gone active duty with that job because it would have been interesting. But yeah, found out about ROTC and did that. So
I could do a whole episode on the things that I wish I had done in the Army.
I know.
I got offered this job. I should have taken it. It was a 26-month training course.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a warehouse management course that they had just created, warehouse management position they just created. I would have graduated the course as a sergeant because I would have been in charge of the warehouses. But no, I didn't want to be in training that long. I just wanted to get my duty station, so I took something else. And it was 19-year-old Jeffa. He was an idiot. Sorry.
No, I've like always been really good at languages, and I took the D-Lab test, and then I was so tired because it was in the middle of like before they actually put you in basic training, where they keep you up for like 48 hours. And I just went to sleep during the test. And I wish I had actually done that one a little better. But no, I mean, I look at my lovely pain in the neck little daughter now, and I'm like, well, I can't have an alternate pass because then she wouldn't exist. So,
yeah,
she owes my pass to that.
So Charlie goes to whatever the Grimm's War universe version of West Point is on Black Rock.
Yep.
Because all the military training happens on Black Rock.
Mm-hmm.
All the terrain is there. They have Arctic, the Raptor School is there, the Marine Raptor School is there, the Pathfinder School is there. Every school I mentioned in the book series all takes place on Black Rock. Because to me, in my mind, it would make sense that if you had an entire planet devoted to training, having all the resources there already, why wouldn't you create more training there?
Right.
And the native population of Black Rock is very small, and it's almost exclusively Navajo, who came over from Old Earth, and which is why you have a lot of Navajo in the Systems Alliance Marines, is because they live on the planet where the Marines train, So June Yanaha, it
Mhm.
mentioned she first appears in book 4 or 5, is Navajo, and uh, Echo Redfern is Navajo, and et cetera, et cetera. Sorry.
No, the only thing actually while we're talking about it is he he doesn't like he goes to ranger school because every lieutenant, at least in the infantry, is expected to go through ranger school like what we have now. But he falls during a climbing event and breaks his leg, and so he is about to get recycled when the mission for medial comes up, and he gets pulled to go do this. And so
Are you going to have him deal with the mental ramifications of
yes,
not qualifying
yeah.
as a ranger? Because that's a
So
big one.
that's yeah, and that's something. I mean, one thing about like his uncle, he's physically he's a big guy. He's over 6 foot. He's pretty likable. He's easygoing. He's competent. There's lots of reasons for people to not like Charlie just because he's kind of like Jacob in that respect. But I wanted to give him something that he's. I mean, he's the kind of person that life, I guess you could say life had been easy because he had parents that loved him. He's got some access to the government through his dad and the things they do. But he's just like a good guy. And there are people that would like to take advantage of that, or I don't want to get too much into it. I mean, sometimes these are my own, things I ran into in the army where you might have grown up one way and then you get hit, you're working right beside people who are basically 1 foot in jail. And it's just a very different. So anyway, I wanted to give him, without making him like super maudlin or anything, I wanted to give him something that nerfs him just a little bit. And he will go to Ranger School eventually, but he had that setback. He's got to go deploy with not carrying a tab like his peers. And so that's always going to be a little something that they'll kind of hold over him, even though they know, you know, he's competent in every other way. So that's just a little something that he's got to overcome. And yeah, he definitely thinks about it. And it'll be on the back of his mind in a lot of ways. So, I guess
Cool.
we can decide when we want to send him to Ranger School, but that's something I was, if we want it to
In
be after,
between books.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, and so yeah, so we have like James has carried this amazing character that I absolutely love. I've read the first couple of chapters; they're great. Um, and my perspective on this whole thing is James and I are partners on this. I am not in charge. I mean, I'm in charge of the universe, the Grimm's universe, but this is James's books. And while both of our names are going to be on it, because I am going to do a pass and edit it and refine it and things like that, it is 100% James's creation. And he, unfortunately, the nature of the business is that it's my name than his name. If I could, I would not have my name on it and just let it be his books. Um, but in order for the books to be shown to my fans, my name has to be on it. I'm definitely going to put some work into it. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, like, I didn't approach this as, oh, James, you're going to write a book for me, and I'm going to take all the credit. It's 100% a collaboration and a partnership, and we are equals on this. And this is as beneficial to him as it is to me. So
Well,
that's really important to me because I see a lot of not all of them, but I see a lot of times you'll see two names on a book, and the person whose name is on the top didn't do anything. They just took advantage of somebody, in my opinion.
had, I guess I have a lot of experience with collaboration. Um, and my thing is that I want this to be the best book for the audience, and so the audience has expectations. They want things to be a certain way, and I don't want to, while I write things a certain way, I actually don't believe we're that different in the ways that we, put sentences together. Um, so
I
yeah,
also don't have that thing about like you have to sound like me and you have to write like me that some collaborators do. The story has to be a certain
right.
way. The themes of the story have to be a certain way. I think and I wrote my books this way on purpose. So I think my opinion on this is probably right. Is that the majority of people like Grimm's War because it is hopeful. It is good people struggling to do the right thing and to succeed, and not a bunch of alcoholic, wife beating morons who just happen to be at the right place at the right time to be heroes. I hate that trope. I didn't want that. And you get that in every other book. They're like, oh, why am I even reading about this guy? Oh, because he's the main character. And so that's like to me, that's the only thing you really have to nail is someone a character people can believe in and root for and feel good about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I really enjoy about the series is just they're all humans trying to do the best they can do. You know, they're not monsters. They're not um some of those tropes of being in the military turns you into, a monster or something like that. And that's not I always feel good when I come away from a Grimm's War novel, and Jacob, one of the biggest things I think about, like I can't remember which book they're firing the long nine. It's probably every book people joke about that, but it's the long nine comes into play. They make the shot, and Jacob just goes, damn fine shooting. and, and I almost like cheered when he did that. But that kind of feeling, and that's something I've been working on too, like some it won't be a complete one for one, but like for instance, whenever ship combat starts and they hit all quarters, drain and you got to drain the can. Like you have a crew drill that you do to prepare for combat. And for me, like all the infantry stuff I did whenever we did small arms stuff was not as close to that. But with the Patriot, when I did Patriot Air Defense System, like there's absolutely a crew drill that goes into like preparing Patriot for combat, both in placing Patriot, getting into the control van, and setting up the computer properly to scan the sector. And so things like that I've been thinking about, like how can we do that with the Mudcat, or the ways that the equipment they're carrying, as they're on small patrols, like something like that that gives us a little bit of that ceremony almost. I don't know how else to put it. Like,
No, and people like that. The
yeah, I mean, it gets
traditions,
me hyped as a
you
reader
know,
when I like, oh
yeah,
shit, they drained the can. All right, it's time. Um,
it's go time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, they're putting their helmets on. It's getting serious.
right, right.
You
And
know,
there's
it and like you, the way you feel about it is the way I feel about it. I feel that way writing it. And my favorite title of any of my books is Traditions of Courage, because the US military is built on hundreds of years of traditions. It's one of the reasons why we're one of the best militaries in the world. You, as a brand new private E1 joining the military, whether it's the Army or the Navy or whatever, you're not even going to be aware of why you're doing things the way you're doing them. But your grandfather is the reason why, because he invented some way of doing something in World War II that worked and it just stuck. We have the best boots in the world for the US military, the best boots in the world. I know guys who were in 20 years ago still have their boots they wore in basic training. And the reason we have the best boots in the world is because in World War I and World War II, we did not have the best boots in the world. We had like 20 or 30% casualties in World War I from trench foot, and it wasn't much better in World War II. And so they spent a lot of money and a lot of time figuring out why the boots didn't work and developing boots that do work. And it sounds stupid, but now we have the best boots in the world for the military. And I still have my jump boots on. And so it's those traditions, those ceremonies are what makes the Alliance Navy and the Alliance military so formidable, is they built on it. And when you look at other cultures and other ways people fight, they don't have that. Like very few militaries have a sergeant corps the way we do in the US. And I built on that strongly in the Grimm's War universe, because the military runs on sergeants. Officers may be in charge, but sergeants make it all happen, or in the Navy's case, chiefs. So, yeah. Sorry.
I was just thinking about like the anxiety we felt when we moved away from, leg boots to like the stuff we wore downrange, and like well, even like it was a version of jump boots, I guess, but the desert version, and then even moving away from those to high techs, like they're not safe. I don't know about this, but they're more comfortable. All right, well, I think we're at about an hour already, so
Yeah, it's easy stuff to talk about.
I know. We'll keep sharing some updates. My goal is to actually be in a first draft state in about, I don't know, 5 weeks. So we'll be, if I can maintain my current writing pace, we'll be in a pretty good place. So I'm excited about it.
Well, if you're interested in beta reading James's books, and I'm not a huge fan of beta readers, I don't actually use a whole lot myself. And I don't know if you have your own beta readers that you use, James. But for our audience, if you're interested in beta reading James' books, like, subscribe, and share, make a comment,
Yep.
and I'll contact you and once we're at the beta reading stage and let you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be awesome. No, I definitely have used beta readers in the past. Like most of my current group are all space opera fans, so it'd be better to get some folks that are really into MILSF. So
It makes a huge difference.
mhm.
I'm kind of a genre, almost said genre Nazi. I'm really hardcore about genre. There are
Mhm.
very few writers who are as hardcore about genre as I am. Space opera and military sci-fi are wildly different genres, to the point where it bothers me when people call my work space opera, and I'm just like, I know you're a reader and you don't know the difference, and that's okay. I know the difference.
You wrote a song in one of the books, which I think pretty much makes it space opera. So sorry.
Oh,
You did it to yourself.
I did it to myself. Well, good to know. But yeah, contact us. Let us know if you want a beta read, and then it's going to be a banger of a book. I know it. And, having read the first part, having spoken with James about it frequently, we're planning on a trilogy. I think all trilogy is going to take trilogy will probably take place on Medial, because that really gives you the opportunity to build a character out of the planet itself. And if it does great, it can be an ongoing series. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But hopefully, we'll hope for the best, right?
Right. 2025.
It's our year, man. It's our
Yep.
year.
Yep. All right. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us. And I promise not to call Jeff Rick anymore. Um,
Okay, Josh.
I know exactly. So I'm gonna cut that too. All right. We'll see y'all later.
Load up troopers on a hit and jump gate. Military science section podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and